Hey guys, welcome to my unofficial, official Poppy Playtime chapter tier list, chapters 1 through 5. And I just wanted to let you guys know my thoughts on each chapter and just rank every chapter in order from worst to best. I will say before we begin, I don't think that there is one specific terrible chapter. I think that all chapters are good in their own way, even though some chapters have more issues than others. Anyway, enough yapping. Let's just get straight into it with... There isn't a lot to say about this chapter, other than it's obviously the game that started the whole franchise. Huggy Wuggy, the iconic villain from the first game. I mean, it's a flawless chapter, to be fair. It's flawless. There's nothing really wrong with it. There's nothing they could improve on, since it's just very simple. It can be beaten in like 6 minutes. Overall, it's just a really good chapter. The introduction of the grab pack mechanics with the power puzzles and stuff, it's really fun. I think Mob really nailed that in the first chapter, because the grab pack is such a unique mechanic that not really any other horror games have, and that used to be one of the main goals when Mob was creating the concept for Poppy Playtime, is they didn't want the game to just be a glorified walking simulator. Like, for instance, let's say Bendy and the Ink Machine. It doesn't really have any interesting mechanics other than, of course, some weapons. I understand what they mean, right? They actually want the player to, like, actually be able to use fun mechanics. And I think they really nailed that. In the first chapter, they set up a very good foundation for the other chapters. Overall, I think that chapter 1 was a very good foundation for the future games, and just Huggy Wuggy's chase was just absolutely terrifying. It was flawless. Huggy Wuggy's chase, one of the best in the franchise, but not the best in my opinion. We will get to that in just a second. I think for chapter 1, I will rank it A tier, not S tier, because there are better chapters, and chapter 1 is only like 30 minutes for a casual playthrough. Considering all the other chapters are quite a bit longer than that, I don't think I can rank chapter 1 S tier, even though it's obviously the first chapter. I also wouldn't call it the best chapter, even though it really didn't do anything wrong. But I think that's enough of chapter 1. Let's move on to... Now that I'm actually holding this chapter, I'm already gonna bump chapter 1 down to B tier. I'm sorry, because chapter 2 is already better than chapter 1 in many ways. So chapter 2, it had one of the best villains in the entire franchise, which is Mommy Longlegs, of course. It introduced a lot of new cool characters like PJ Pugapillar, Bunzo Bunny, the Mini Huggies. Chapter 2 gave us Kissy Missy, which was, that scene is one of the best scenes in the entire franchise, because everybody thought that it was Huggy Wuggy, of course, which was really well made by Mob. But I think what made chapter 2 really good is that it expanded a lot on what chapter 1 already had. So more puzzles, but different from the first game, like the one with the big claw machine in the storage room. It added new mechanics, such as the little elevator puzzle with the little button you needed to press to make it go up. It just added a lot of new small improvements, and then it obviously introduced the green hand, which was just, you know, an upgrade over the red one. It was able to carry power for 10 seconds, which, you know, it's a cool feature. Very simple, but it did add a lot to the chapter, I feel like. What I also liked especially about chapter 2 is the mini games. It was a very simple concept, just 3 mini games. Beat all 3 and you win. Very simple. Lore-wise, it also made a lot of sense, right? Training the kids for the orphanage and then turning them into bigger bodies. But we didn't know all of that information, obviously, when the chapter came out. Purely for gameplay, the Bunzo Bunny sequence, that was really good, because he did provide a lot of pressure, which, you know, made it quite a bit more difficult to focus. So I think that Bunzo was really, really good for the first game. Then we went to the Mini Huggies. That's probably the most difficult one. I still fail that game sometimes, because I mean, simply put, it is just pretty difficult. It is pretty hard to see, especially in some very dark corners. You can barely see those Mini Huggies, so that one's probably the most difficult one. And then the PJ Pugapillar one was also just really good. PJ's design is really creepy, but also kind of cute, and the confusion of not knowing where to go at the end of the chase sometimes resulted in having to restart it, and then eventually obviously seeing that you needed to swing to the window. That overall PJ chase was really solid as well. And then obviously the main character, Mommy Longlegs, the main antagonist of that game, she was such a good villain, dude. She was creepy, she was... The voice acting was top notch, and her chase is the best in the franchise, and I don't think it's close. I'm gonna be honest. The fact that they split up her chase sequence in 3 sections, with the third being the big finale, is so cool and unique. I absolutely love it. And then at the end of the chase, you need to pull the lever and crush Mommy to death, which I think Chapter 2 had probably the most gruesome death in all the chapters. Like, it was so in your face that was like the moment where everybody was like, okay, yeah, they're not scared to show some very gruesome stuff in these games. And in Chapter 3, of course, they stepped it up a whole nother notch, but we'll get to that in a second. Overall, Chapter 2 is probably my second favorite chapter, just because it also was basically perfect. There's not really anything they could have done better. I hope that they give Chapter 2 a proper update soon. They also gave Chapter 1 a proper update, so I hope that Chapter 2 gets one too, because maybe like updating the graphics a little bit, fixing some more bugs that the chapter might still have. I think it deserves it, because I think that it's probably Mob's second best chapter, in my opinion. Of course, let's talk about the end with the train crash. First of all, sick that there's a train in this game that you actually get to drive. Super cool. And then Poppy's betrayal, obviously. We would have actually been able to escape the factory right here in this chapter. She says it in Chapter 5 too, but betraying us and making us go down to Playcare, crashing the train. Super good. And then, of course, the Playcare teaser at the end was really cool. Especially since Chapter 3 took, like, close to 2 years, like 1.5 to 2 years. Because, like, obviously they were working on Project Playtime. I think that Chapter 2 is probably my second favorite chapter. Yeah, I am going to give Chapter 2 probably S tier. I won't give it A tier, because it's not, like, worse in a way. There's just a better chapter than Chapter 2, and that is... I'm just gonna put Chapter 3 above Chapter 2. I think that Chapter 3 was the peak of Poppy Playtime. I think that Chapter 3 is the best chapter because, simply put, it was scarier than Chapter 2 in terms of, like, the environment. Like, way more blood everywhere, way more creepy environmental storytelling. So much lore. Like, actually insane, with all the VHS tapes, all the notes you could collect throughout the chapter, what we learned from just the characters we met. The horror aspect, they turned it up to 11 in this game. I loved the smiling critters. They were such cool characters. The way this chapter is built up is really cool. First, the reveal of Playcare was really cool. It reminded me a lot of the Aperture Science Innovators testing spheres from Portal 2. And I'm surprised I haven't ever really seen anybody talking about that, but they look very similar, right? Like, obviously, Playcare, it's more like a dome and not like a full sphere, but the way that the thing is, like, held up with, like, all the support beams, it reminded me a lot of those Aperture Science testing spheres. That big reveal from the outside of Playcare was really cool. And then, of course, the inside with, like, the elevator ride and just getting to look at how cool this area really was really sick. And what I also really liked is that after each segment of the game, just like in Chapter 2, we got to come back in Playcare to go to a different area to restore power. Okay, so we come down in the elevator, we get tasked to go to the gas production zone. We solve a puzzle there, and then, of course, the power gets cut off by Ollie, the prototype. And I think that the gas production zone is such a cool area. It was really cool. So then we need to restore power in Home Sweet Home. And I think the dream sequence with Catnap's backstory was really well done. I think not everybody picked up that it was Catnap's backstory. Neither did I on my first playthrough. Now that I know that it was Catnap's backstory, I think they did a fantastic job on how they incorporated telling Catnap's backstory, which was obviously through that dream sequence. I think that was sick. Then, of course, the little Huggy chase with the Nightmare Huggy. Super cool to see him back after like 3 years at that point. Of course, we got hinted that he survived in chapter 2, obviously. But it was cool to see like a nightmare version of him in chapter 3. I think that that was pretty cool. So then we wake up, obviously he's scripted to jump scare us. Then we wake up, we do the little puzzle in Home Sweet Home with the illusion of Catnap being present. Now we'll come back to that on Catnap's presence specifically. But for now, eventually we restore power from Home Sweet Home. We obviously meet Kissy and Poppy then. She tells us about it. We restore power to the full dome with a big button. Then after we've done that, we get tasked to restore power using the generator present in the school. Big sad because, little unfortunate, Mr. Light ends up breaking the generator. And we ended up having to use the generator from the counselor's office. What I will say though is that the sequence with the Mr. Light weeping angel chase, that was top notch. Another very well done chase scene. It was not about speed, it was being like tactical. Considering she was always pretty close to you, using your brain to solve the puzzles too was pretty difficult sometimes, but I think that sequence was really well done. The little puzzle where she was locked in with you in the tiny like final room before you escaped, that was extremely difficult and kind of frustrating sometimes. I think that they did a very good job with that. Also, Mr. Light, fantastic character design, super creepy, really cool. Then of course Mr. Light broke the generator, so we ended up having to go to the counselor's office. But before we went there, we came across Catnap's prototype shrine, which was like the moment where everybody was like, yeah, this ain't no kids game anymore, man. And then the playhouse, probably my least favorite section. The puzzle you had to do there was not that fun with all the little critters. Not really that creepy as well. I will say what came after that, of course, the Dog Day chase, very cool to meet Dog Day. I think his chase was also put together pretty well with the smiling critters taking him over and him then chasing us. Very gruesome again. Anyway, yeah, his chase was pretty good. Fairly simple, pretty fast, just run away from that guy. It did a pretty decent job at being scary. Then we need to go to the counselor's office to get the final generator. Overall, I don't really have anything to say about that. It was just one big puzzle sequence. The little dream sequence at the end, I mean, it was a little confusing. Also, for some reason, and it still is, extremely laggy. I'm getting like 10 to 20 FPS for some reason. It's not that my PC is terrible. Like, I have a 5060. Like, that ain't no problem. For everybody with like 4090s. It was bad, man. I do hope they fix that because it was it's a little distracting and just very weird. Okay, then finally we restore power using the generator from the counselor's office, and then we are obviously tasked to put the big blue battery into the battery slot in the gas production zone. Unfortunately, then Catnap shows up, and then I think this is unfortunately a bit of a poorer side of the chapter, which was the Catnap final boss fight. In the current patch, it is fairly doable. If you would play it for the first time now, I think it is actually pretty doable. When you know exactly what you're doing, it's actually a pretty okay boss. Unfortunately, it wasn't on launch because all the instructions were on the computer screen. Nobody knew what to do. We just got chased by Catnap. People are not concentrating on a screen. So people were paying attention to the screen way too late, so they missed half of the instructions. When they finally noticed it, they were like still ignoring it half the time. So it ended up taking people such a long time to just understand and then eventually beat that boss fight at launch. It was not fun. I ended up never beating it on launch because I just ended up rage quitting out because I didn't understand what to do. I didn't understand any of the mechanics that I was supposed to use. It was just really confusing, and I ended up never beating the boss fight until I knew exactly how I was supposed to do it. So I ended up never really seeing the actual ending of the game myself. I just had to look up a YouTube video to see what the actual ending of the chapter looked like. Because, yeah, that boss fight was rough. That was not play tested properly. I'm not afraid to say it. That boss fight at launch, it was terrible. I mean, it was also the first chapter to have a boss fight and not an actual scary ending chase, which still not a huge fan of, to be honest. I do not like that the more modern chapters don't have a scary final chase, because I think that was what made chapter 1 and chapter 2 shine a lot, is that they had a very scary final chase with the main antagonist of the chapter. Basically all the other chapters just have a boss fight. I know that chapter 5 kind of has a chase and a boss fight mixed in one with the prototype, It's not scary, it's just a boss. It's a horror game. Why is it not scary? What are we doing? Anyway, back to chapter 3. In this current patch, boss fight is actually pretty okay. It's very beatable with the voice lines that they added. It's actually very clear what you are supposed to do. After beating that boss, obviously, the prototype kills Catnap and takes his body away. Again, pretty gruesome death that he just stabs him through the head. And then after that, of course, we return, make the red smoke go to the left silo, which was our objective all the way at the start of the game, and then we meet up with Poppy for the final time that chapter. We end up finally seeing what the Hour of Joy was, which we've been learning about through the ARGs before the chapters dropped, and also throughout the chapter itself. And that was a very cool VHS tape, of course, to finally see what the Hour of Joy was, you know, actually about. Like, what actually happened. And I think learning about that at the end of the chapter was actually very cool. And then after, of course, we watched the Hour of Joy and Poppy finishes her dialogue, we take the elevator down to the prison, and then, unfortunately, Kissy gets attacked by the prototype. So, I think overall, chapter 3, extremely solid chapter. The only thing that I'm not a fan of with this chapter are two things. It didn't have a proper chase to end off the chapter, which was one of the strongest points of the previous two chapters. And what I'm also not a big fan of is that the characters we meet and help throughout the game, they keep mentioning that Catnap could be around every corner. And when we take the elevator, after resetting the power in Playcar, after we take that elevator with Poppy and Kissy down, Poppy says again, Catnap is coming. We don't see him until the very end of the game. Like, yes, we see him show up, but he doesn't give a shit about us. He's not a threat at all throughout the entire game, all the way until the end. And I think that's a shame, because he's such a cool character. He's probably the coolest character in the entire franchise. I just think it's a shame that we barely see him throughout the entire chapter. That's the only two negative points I have in this chapter. Other than that, very well done. Very well done. Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna rank chapter 3 S tier. I think that it's better than chapter 2. It's longer. It has more story, more lore, creepier characters, S tier, and it is my favorite chapter of the entire franchise. So, let's move on to... Okay, so moving on to the most controversial chapter in the entire franchise so far. I'm not gonna talk about this chapter too much because I don't have a lot to say about it, because already I feel like this is the most forgettable chapter of all of them. I feel like all the other chapters have some very memorable thing about them, right? Like chapter 3 had Playcare, chapter 2 had the game station, chapter 1 first chapter, obviously. Chapter 5 had the labs and all the, you know, cool stuff. Like, chapter 4, yeah, it had the prison and safe haven, but, like, they just don't feel as impactful as the other areas we visit throughout the franchise. And when talking about chapter 4, I gotta talk about how god-awful this chapter was at launch. It was so bad. This was the first chapter where Mob was seriously trying to use AI enemies. The most clear example of that is, of course, the Yarnaby section in No Man's Land, which was almost unbeatable. Yarnaby could hear you basically everywhere. He had a field of view as large as the Empire State Building. This guy could see you from anywhere in No Man's Land. Even if there was a wall blocking you, he could still get your exact location. Not to mention, even when he would eventually find you, which wouldn't usually take that long, the hiding spots didn't even work, and he could just kill you while you were inside those anyway, which was so stupid. Luckily, there were some pretty okay checkpoints, but my god, that section was actually so hard, and it still is. It's still really difficult, but it's like doable. And then just overall, I felt like this chapter was just kind of all over the place. Like, first we need to make our way through the prison, we meet up with the doctor, then we have that whole Yarnaby chase stuff, and then we finally meet up with Dowie, need to do all of that stuff, and then we finally get to Safe Haven after like a quarter of the game, and then we need to go to like No Man's Land, do all of that stuff, and then we come like back, and then we need to do something else, because then our objective becomes to kill the doctor, but that whole process is like 50% of the entire game. Just getting to the doctor and killing him. And then when you finally like get close, you have that god-awful section with Baba Chops, which is just not fun. He's just weird and annoying. And then when you finally think you can confront the doctor, then you get dropped down another trap hole and need to make your way back to the doctor's lair by putting in all of those batteries in those battery sockets while the doctor's minions slowly wake up and start hunting you down. Then we finally get back to the doctor's lair and we just push a button and he just, like, his brain just blows up. And the stupidest thing was, because those minions were still chasing you, people weren't paying attention to the doctor literally blowing up. So they didn't end up seeing what happened. The doctor blowing up happened after all of those very annoying little chases and puzzles. So people were not like, they didn't want to just stand still and then pay attention. They just wanted to make like good progress because they were tired of doing annoying stuff. And of course, that was all on launch, and they fixed most of that. Like, a lot of stuff that they very much want you to see is now a cutscene, and those cutscenes actually look pretty nice. The doctor one is really good. It's pretty clear what's happening then, but yeah, I mean, on launch, it was just not good. And I keep referring back to the launch version because that's the version that every single YouTuber and every diehard fan that had been waiting for that chapter had played as soon as it released. So most of us can relate to how bad the chapter was on launch. Now, it is better now. There are still issues. Just overall, I think this chapter is just a bit less strong, because I just feel like what you're supposed to do is just all over the place, and the fact that your objective being to kill the doctor is almost half the game is just a bit too much. And then when you finally kill the doctor, then you just go back to safe haven, and then your objective all of a sudden is to start finding bombs and placing them in the foundation to then blow up the factory with the red smoke. Dude, we just killed the doctor, like one of the most overpowered beings in that whole factory. That guy had been controlling like all the doors and cameras since chapter 1. We just killed him and we just moved on from it like it was nothing. Like, I just think that that's kind of silly. Anyway, then we place the mines in the foundation, do the little puzzle there, and then we finally exit the mine, meet up with Dowie again, and then we find out that the prototype stole the bombs and then planted them in Safe Haven, absolutely obliterating what Safe Haven was. And of course that hurt Dowie so much. I genuinely still feel bad for him. And, you know, that pisses him off. And then he just turns into this massive clay salamander monster with the 3 kids he's made of coming out of his mouth, which I think is such a cool design. Then after that cutscene, we end up getting chased by Dowie, and that chase on launch was also not good. It was way too buggy. After that little Dowie chase, we end up getting into the most annoying part of that entire chapter, which was the Dowie final boss fight. And it's still terrible, in my opinion. It's still not a fun boss. The idea of the boss is pretty cool. Dowie's just chasing you. You have these ice canisters, and you have to shoot those ice canisters while attached to him when Dowie is under one of those saw machines, so you can freeze him, cut him, and then after you do that 3 times, you temporarily kill him. It's a pretty cool concept, right? It's pretty original. The boss fight just wasn't finished. It was so buggy. Sometimes those ice canisters wouldn't attach to him. Like, I would just prefer a scary chase sequence, but like, I guess that's just the direction that Mob has taken since chapter 3, because, you know, chapter 5 also got a final boss. But like, yeah, that Dowie chase, it was pretty bad. Anyway, we finally temporarily kill him. We get to that big, like, crusher room, and then Dowie shows up one final time. We shoot the canister, he drops us, and then we are supposed to pull down the spinning, like, piston crusher down on Dowie, finally killing him. And that ended up being quite an emotional scene. After that, we just take the slide down, and we meet up with Poppy and Kizzy again, and we finally hear the prototype talk for the first time, revealing that he was Ollie all along, which for some people it was pretty obvious. I personally wasn't really convinced that Ollie was the prototype before it was confirmed. So for me it was a pretty cool plot twist, but for other people it was more obvious, and it makes sense why they thought so. But that was a pretty cool scene. And then Poppy obviously runs off, ending up in Lily's dollhouse in chapter 5. And then Kissy tries to save us after the bombs blow up, ripping her arm off, and us falling down into one of the poppy farms at the entrance of the labs where chapter 5 takes place. And then we get one of the coolest scenes again in the entire franchise. Chapter 4 had one of the coolest endings, which was, of course, that it finally got revealed that Huggy Wuggy survived his fall in Chapter 1 and was now ready to absolutely rip us apart in Chapter 5, ending Chapter 4 with a massive cliffhanger yet again. So, yeah, I think that Chapter 4, even though that the chapter was, and still is, kind of mid, it did have one of the coolest endings in the entire franchise. And, yeah, I think for that reason, I'm just gonna rank Chapter 4 B tier. I literally can't put it below Chapter 1. The only reason I'm putting it above Poppy Playtime Chapter 1 is because this chapter's like 5 to 6 hours. You can't compare that to a 30-minute chapter, and then I can't rank a 30-minute chapter above a 5-hour chapter, dude. Like, I just can't do that. I would either have to bump chapter 1 down to C tier or just have them on the same level. So I'm just gonna keep it like this, and maybe I'll bump chapter 1 down to C tier. Anyway, I think that that's enough of chapter 4. Let's move on to the newest chapter, which is, of course... Okay, so I'm gonna try to keep chapter 5 quite short because this video is already taking way too long. I'm just mostly gonna talk about the things that I liked and some things that I didn't like and what Mob could improve on, and then I'm just gonna close off the video. So, for chapter 5, overall, I think that this chapter is a massive step up from chapter 4 again. The overall game just felt a lot better in terms of the progression. We didn't end up going back to like a specific area every single time. We just progressed through the labs all the way to the backup, which is of course the doctor. And I think that that was a good decision to just have the player progress through the entirety of the labs instead of having to go back to one specific section. I really liked that Huggy Wuggy played a decent role in this chapter again. The section that he was roaming around was pretty decent. His chase sequences were kind of cool. I really liked the memory parts where you get to experience how Huggy came to be, which was pretty cool. A thing that I didn't really like about Huggy was his animations. They seemed very rushed, and like the transition between his animations was very obvious, and he didn't feel like a living creature anymore. Like, he felt very video game NPC-like, which he didn't really feel like that in chapter 1. Like, I feel like his animations were kind of a step down from chapter 1. That's like the biggest issue I have with him in this chapter specifically. What I also liked about this chapter is that we got a new hand, finally. Because in chapter 4 we only got like the red hand back with like a flashlight, and that was it. But in chapter 5 we got the pressure hand and the conductive hand that could power the hand with ice power, fire power, and electricity, which was pretty cool. That was a pretty cool upgrade over the green hand. So I definitely like that. I like the pressure hand feature with being able to like push containers away, activate those like red smoke pressure machines, break vents with it. I think that was a pretty cool mechanic. And the conductive hand was just like an upgrade over the green hand, so also pretty cool. I liked the locations that we got to visit in chapter 5. I'm a bit less of a fan of the recycling and reclamation all the way at the start of the game, because like, I don't know, it was just really dark. It's not that I specifically dislike it, I'm just personally not a huge fan of that area. There wasn't really anything wrong with it specifically, but I just personally don't really like it. I've seen lots of complaints about how random the Lily Lovebraid section is. I agree with that. It makes no sense. Like, the scaling of this facility in chapter 5 was like, okay, it's not even realistic anymore. Chapter 4 was already kind of pushing it, but chapter 5 with Sweet Street, like, that's just too big, man. Like, it was so massive, and I'm not saying that that's bad. Like, it was a cool area. If this would be a real location, how in God's name would that be possible? Like, chapter 5 makes the factory feel like almost Aperture Laboratories scale of how deep and how massive that facility is. Like, it's actually insane, and I don't mind it. I love big underground facilities. I think it's cool, but I think they're pushing the realism of how massive that facility really is a bit too much. But, you know, for a video game, I don't mind it. I think it's cool. The dollhouse, I think that that's really cool. I like Lily Lovebraid's character. I think that she is a really cool character. I really like her. What I didn't like is her chase scene, and I think that most people can agree with me on that. That chase scene was very unfinished on launch. It was, yeah, very bad. I probably spent like 20 minutes straight on trying that chase because it was just so unclear what I was supposed to do. And it's still not great in the current patch, I'm not gonna lie. But they definitely made some improvements for it, but it could definitely be better. I will say the prototype reveal was super cool. I love his design. In terms of lore accuracy, what we learned about him over the previous chapters, I can see why some people might not be a fan of his design, because it doesn't really make sense with like the lore. Purely from a design perspective, I think that he looks sick. Like, he looks so cool. Yeah, that overall tea party scene was really cool. He did actually seem very intimidating. They absolutely nailed that scene. I also really like Giblet and Chum. Almost forgot to mention them. I think that Giblet's a cool character. We kind of just forget about him after we get split from him by Chum, after we get confronted by the prototype. Like, we don't see him until, like, very close to the end of the game. But I think that he's cool. He has a cool story, I guess, being like turned wrong side out by the prototype as punishment, right? I like him. And I also really like Chum. Like, we don't see him that much. Like, after he spits us out, he just dips and we don't see him for the rest of the game. I hope he returns in chapter 6. I highly doubt it. But I think that Chum's a cool character. He's cute, he's funny, he's kind of goofy. I don't know, I like him. Overall of this chapter, I really like how this chapter is paced. There's not really a specific section that is really extremely long or could have been easily made shorter. The only thing that I think chapter 5 could improve on is, number one, they should make it more clear what puzzles are for a collectible and what puzzles are required to actually progress through the game. Number two, I think that they should definitely put some time into maybe fixing some animations, specifically for Huggy Wuggy, because he just looks really, really rushed. I'll put a quick clip of him on screen. You'll see what I mean. Like, it just looks really rushed and just janky, and I don't like it. Especially considering, like, I'm not an animator, okay? I don't know how to animate stuff. I understand that that is really, really difficult. But this is the 5th chapter, and throughout all the chapters, Mob's animation has been top-notch. And I think that Huggy Wuggy in chapter 5 kind of took a step down. Not specifically in the animations themselves, but, like, the transition between the animations. Him turning just 180 degrees. It just looks really derpy. So I think they should maybe put some time in fixing that. And last but definitely not least, my biggest complaint about this chapter is very abrupt transitions between locations. The most blatant one, this is not the only one, but the most blatant one I can think of is after the section where you need to avoid Huggy, where he's just roaming around. We finally enter Sweet Street, but there is an elevator that we presumably take down or up to Sweet Street. However, instead of just entering the elevator, we just walk towards the elevator, hit a loading screen, and then we just get teleported outside the elevator in Sweet Street. Why? Why not just make us enter the elevator, then have a loading screen, and then spawn us in the elevator in Sweet Street? and then just let us walk out. It's such a small thing that you could probably fix in like 5 minutes. I'm not even kidding. Just change the loading zone. I don't know why the cut between locations has to be so abrupt. And it's not just Sweet Street, it happens a few more times throughout the game, and I think that that is a very easy fix. Just change the trigger for the loading zone, and just change the spawn point in the next map. I think that's all they really have to do. Maybe animate some doors opening or something, but like that shouldn't take too long, right? That are like the only 3 things I really have a problem with this chapter. There's nothing else that I specifically dislike about this game. I think that Chapter 5 is extremely solid. For now, I am going to rank Chapter 5 A tier because it's not as good as Chapter 3 and Chapter 2, but it's definitely miles better than Chapter 4, and it's better than Chapter 1. I think we can all agree on that. So, yeah, I think that that is my Poppy Playtime Chapters 1 through 5 tier list. Let me know if you guys agree in the comments down below, and then I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.